The wail of air raid sirens, followed by a hail of missiles. Saddam Hussein's desperate gamble to draw Israel into the Gulf War. Good evening. The top story in this special edition of Nightcast, local reaction to today's sneak attack on Israel. First, a look at what happened. The Israeli army says the Scud missiles caused serious damage, but only minor injuries. 3 of them hit Tel Aviv, 2 exploded in Haifa, 3 others falling in unpopulated parts of the country. These pictures show the damage in an older section of the city. As far as we know, Israel has not launched a reprisal attack, but Israelis are not ruling one out, and as you heard Dan Rather say, a cabinet meeting is on about that.
Israel reserves the right to respond in any way it would deem fit, without going at the present time into particulars what the decision of the Israeli government in that respect will be.
Israelis have been warned to expect a gas attack. The air raid sent millions of people scrambling for gas masks. Apparently, none of the Scud missiles carried chemical warheads. Before we tell you about the Bay Area reaction to the attack on Israel, first you have to see the pictures of the Allied attack on Baghdad. Pictures taken by a British camera crew as the American bombers moved in. The Iraqis set up a barrage of anti-aircraft artillery fire. Listen to what happened.
Those pictures taken from last night. Well, now back to our top story that happened today. People all over the Bay Area reacted with shock and anger to the attack on Israel tonight, whether or not they have ties to the Holy Land. Sherry Hu has that story.
War makes people cry. For people at the Anti-Defamation League office, there was good reason when they heard Israel had been hit by Iraqi missiles.
As a community, it's fair to say that we are shocked and horrified that Saddam has delivered on his gruesome pledge to attack Israel.
Reaction at the Israeli consulate was just as emotional, though the attack on the country was not a total surprise.
Let's hope that Saddam Hussein will be punished and he won't be able to do this again. He is the incarnation of evil, as far as I'm concerned.
It's not the first war the state of Israel has had since...
Some mortal men get their answers in prayer sessions. Here in San Jose, Rabbi Lapin says he has tremendous faith.
I feel very much for the whole world at a time like this. I don't want, and none of my people wants, that there should be loss of life. That we don't want.
Lena Mossad doesn't want anyone to die either, but unlike the rabbi, Mossad is Palestinian.
This is an Arab problem, should have been solved by Arabs.
Tonight, Mossad's worried too because her sister, brother-in-law, and their children live in Haifa, one of the areas hit by Iraqi missiles.
It's fear, it's worry, it's, I think of this whole thing could have been avoided by giving more time and more talks, more policies.
There are people here in the Bay Area without those ties to Israel, and even for them, this new dimension to the war hits home.
It's terrifying that we are a global village. We can't do things anymore in a way that is just one-on-one.
I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. I knew that something was going to happen. I'm surprised that it's happened this early.
We got reports that we had decimated the Iraqi Air Force, which I found a little hard to believe, which now seems not to be the case. And I guess it's going to get very ugly now.
It worries me, though. It seemed like things were going very well yesterday, and today it's, if Israel's brought into the conflict, it changes things quite a bit.
Tonight, people are praying and wondering about the next step in the war in the Middle East. In San Francisco, Sherry Hu, Channel 5 Eyewitness News, Nightcast.
Imagine the feelings of Israeli citizens in America tonight, thousands of miles from their home and loved ones. Their only link to the anguish there, a television screen. Earlier this evening, reporter Linda Schacht spoke with David and Han Hindawi, who came to the Bay Area from Israel 20 years ago. Tonight, the war in the Middle East drew them right back into the turmoil.
It is horrifying to see what has happened in Tel Aviv. I'm thinking of my mother, who is there now, cloistered in a small room, which is sealed, but essentially she is sitting there wondering why is it that a man 600 miles away from where she lives is sending missiles to the heart of the Tel Aviv populated area.
It's an Arab to Arab war. It's not an Israeli to Arab war. The Iraqis attacked Kuwait. They attacked an Arab country, and Israel should be basically out of it, completely out of it.
In spite of their anger at the Iraqi attack, the Indawis hope that Israel can find a way to stay out of the fighting.
Today's Iraqi attack on Israel confirms a feeling held by many in the Bay Area that the Middle East is a distant, unfamiliar place, best known for erupting and frightening headlines. Behind those headlines lies one of the oldest, most complex civilizations on Earth. Dr. Michel Nabti holds a PhD in Mideast Studies at Stanford. He not only knows the Mideast firsthand, he spent a lifetime understanding its complexities. Dr. Nabti, Israel is saying tonight it reserves the right to retaliate against that attack. In fact, we're told the cabinet is in session debating that point right now. If there's a counterattack, if there's a retaliation, does that mean the coalition is possibly going to be able to hold together, or does it mean war with Syria and Egypt?
Well, I think already the missile attack on Israel bring a multi-dimensional factors onto the whole situation, and Israel retaliation would even add to that. In Arab-wise, internally within the Arab world, vis-a-vis Iraq, vis-a-vis the coalition within itself, the United States and Israel. So it has a multifaceted impact on the whole scene.
So what is your best guess as to what Syria or Egypt would do?
I would say that Egypt wouldn't do very much because it had committed itself and already announced that it would not act in case Israel retaliates. Syria is a prospect to break away.
What did Saddam Hussein gain by sending Scud missiles into Israel?
Well, first, he made good on his threat or promise, whatever, and he is identifying what he called the Arab enemy within the coalition with Israel, what he thinks the enemy of the Arab states and the Arab people. He is also putting a wedge also between him and Syria in particular, as he always called for the liberation of the Golan Heights, Syrian land. He is also stirring up a lot of popular support across the Arab world. Like, here is our hero goes, or, stood up to the big powers, the US and its allies. So there are a number of factors. He would also lose when it comes to negotiation between Israel and the United States. Israel may have now a much stronger edge with the US than if it were not attacked.
So Israel would get a greater victory by not retaliating, by ruining Saddam's game plan?
Possibly there is this potential there, and I believe there is an important point in this.
All right, thank you, Dr. Nabti, for that perspective on today's attack against Israel. Kate?
Well, the word from Saudi Arabia is yet another attack against Iraq and occupied Kuwait is underway tonight. American and allied jets have flown more than 1,000 missions against Iraq in the first 24 hours of fighting. Time and again, the bombers fly to Iraq, drop their load, fly back, and load up with fuel and more explosives. We showed you the ground fire they are facing. At least one pilot had a run-in with an Iraqi jet interceptor, and he says it didn't last long.
When he blew up, I could see a piece of the airplane blowing up. Obviously, it was at night. I couldn't see if a parachute or anything like that. It was a huge fireball. I don't anticipate anybody getting out of that.
Along with the manned bombers, 100 Tomahawk cruise missiles have rained down on Iraq. They were launched from surface ships and reportedly by submarines.
The Iraqis have made only a feeble attempt to strike back at the Americans. One of their Scud missiles reportedly launched at the American air base in Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. It was intercepted by a Patriot anti-missile. We'll have more on that for you in a moment. The only evidence of Iraqi firepower is the oil refinery damaged by artillery fire at Khafji, just 8 miles south of the Kuwaiti border. This is in the early stages of yesterday's fighting. The fire from that attack lasting long after the guns had been silenced. True to form, Saddam Hussein is not staying silent. Baghdad TV showing him greeting soldiers and civilians in Baghdad, while in a statement on Radio Baghdad, Saddam warned President Bush, "If you believe our ground forces have been neutralized, you are deluding yourself."
Now the casualty figures. CBS News is reporting the loss of a second American warplane, and the Pentagon has released the name of the Navy pilot of an FA-18 that was shot down yesterday. He was identified as Lieutenant Commander Michael Spiker of Jacksonville, Florida. The count of aircraft lost so far in conflicts, the U.S. says that the Allies lost 2 American planes, 2 British planes, and a Kuwaiti jet, that is. Iraq says 76 attacking planes were shot down and gave civilian casualties in Iraq as 23 dead and 66 injured. And this note, the United States Senate today approved a resolution praising President Bush and the troops in the Gulf, and the vote was unanimous. It is a symbolic gesture, but the senators hope it sends a message to Saddam Hussein.
Still across the country and here at home, thousands of demonstrators were back on the streets. Here in San Francisco, they were on the streets after a night of protest. Tomas Roman was right in the middle of the action.
The federal building is closed today.
About 1,500 to 2,000 protesters ringed the federal building this morning, beginning at about 5:30 a.m. They turned away workers unfortunate enough to try to get into work. Some were merely taunted, while others were roughed up when they persisted in trying to get inside. The protesters locked their arms together and held on to some fencing they brought to the protest. They apparently wanted to make any arrest as difficult as possible. Federal police dealt severely with this woman. She had trouble after her encounter with police.
Hey, no more! No way! No one goes no way!
Some demonstrators left the federal building and blocked Van Ness at Turk Streets at about 8 a.m. Then they attacked a bus that tried to cross the intersection. Drivers didn't take kindly to the blockade or the violence.
Stopping traffic like this for people to get to work, that doesn't do any good anyway. That only irritates them.
The totally selfish, unwarranted intrusion into private people's lives.
Finally, after letting the protesters close the street for a few minutes, the police took Van Ness back.
If you do not disperse, you'll be subject to arrest.
Police swept into Polk and Turk and arrested dozens of protesters. Then police massed about 200 strong and worked to open Golden Gate, Turk, and Polk streets. Even with emotions running high, most arrests were made peacefully. A group of perhaps 1,500 protesters then took off, headed towards Market Street. The 1,500 grew to perhaps 4,000 people who massed in front of the Pacific Stock Exchange. They said it was immoral to make money while making war.
One of the things the protesters told us they were really angry about was the fact that the stock market went up and oil prices went down. So that's why they're here at the Pacific Stock Exchange.
Police, who ran out of these plastic handcuffs earlier this afternoon, stocked up on them before making more than 100 additional arrests. Here, emotions ran high when war protesters met presidential supporters.
Well, who are you and I to decide? You don't know all the facts. I don't know all the facts. We can't oversee. I think he is the best informed person.
Protesters and police have put in long hours. Police overtime will be paid for by city taxpayers. Taxpayers will also pay for a lot of damage by some demonstrators prone to violence. Costs will run high here in San Francisco and in and around the Persian Gulf. In San Francisco, Tomas Roman, Channel 5, Eyewitness News.
So many demonstrators have been arrested in San Francisco. The city jail has run out of space. Those protesters are spending the night in a different kind of cell. They're being held in the huge shed at Pier 40 on the Embarcadero. Tonight, Mayor Art Agnos toured the improvised jail facilities, forced into service by overcrowded cells at city facilities.
And there was another demonstration in the Bay Area today, but this one was decidedly different. Monta Vista High School students have a lesson for violent anti-war protesters.
As a general thing, most of the protests have been pretty peaceful, but the ones that haven't, I can't understand, because these people claim to want peace and they go out and start their own wars. And I just can't understand why they're doing that.
They agree with President Bush's decision to use force in the Persian Gulf and want to support our troops.
We're just here to...
The students appear to want the same things as militant anti-war demonstrators do, a fast solution, and they want peace, but they just have a different way of showing it. The sound of battle from Operation Desert Storm is echoing in the Navy town of Alameda. Nearly 3,000 sailors from the Bay Area are in the Gulf tonight. And Les Trent tells us what the people in Alameda are going through.
In this Navy city,
I have 2 cousins that are over there right now.
Almost everyone knows someone in the Persian Gulf.
He's my brother-in-law, David Evans. He's on the Ranger, USS Ranger.
Cashier Val Wadsworth was working the register at this grocery store popular with military families when news of Operation Desert Storm broke yesterday.
You know, people were stopping and, you know, crying in the aisles and stuff. You know, anybody who had a radio, they were just kind of walking around listening to, you know, following those people around and stuff. So it was really an eerie feeling.
Elsewhere in the East Bay,
listen, get the smells of this part of the city.
Life goes on as usual, but not really. Even kids like these third graders out on a field trip are affected by war.
They feel the unrest that the adults around them do. Children get a lot of their stability with routine. And when the routine is broken for whatever reason, that it changes their manner, their behavior.
UC Berkeley, the birthplace of anti-war protests, is quiet today.
Because I'm just going to go ahead and support the troops and go on about my business.
Most of the protest regulars concentrating on night demonstrations here or opting to join the protesters in San Francisco.
Come Tuesday, when school starts, there's going to be a lot of action around here, I'm sure.
And with the Israeli equation possibly lifting the battle another notch, he could very well be right. In the East Bay, Les Trent, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Today we heard reports of Allied ground troops moving toward the Kuwaiti border, but there's no way of knowing when or if they might join the battle to force Iraqi troops out of Kuwait. However, a ground assault eventually could become necessary. In the early hours of the war, the U.S. led the coalition to a quick domination of airspace over Iraq and Kuwait. But as Mike Hegedus tells us, it remains to be seen just how quickly the coalition would control a land battle.
All day, convoys of Allied ground forces stationed in Saudi Arabia coiled north along the Saudi border. 2,000 tanks ready to attack, waiting to strike. Waiting because first a slow, unrelenting airstrike in Kuwait by these B-52 bombers launched from bases in Saudi Arabia and from Diego Garcia, pummeling targets within the Kuwaiti border. The B-52 is part of the ground preparation air attack, joined by stealth bombers, Apache helicopters, and the dependable A-10 Warthogs. The task at hand to hit and dismantle Iraqi command and communication centers, preparing the Allies for the next logical step.
The ground commanders will not want to go in until they think they've really beat these people up, but they've already started to do that.
Started by striking against these. The Allied forces must try to destroy Iraqi defensive fortifications within Kuwait. 1,000-foot-wide minefields with razor-sharp barbed wire. Trenches filled with napalm or crude oil, dug before huge earthen dikes, behind which tanks are manned by the so-called elite Iraqi Republican Guard units. In total, the Allies could face over 500,000 troops backed by 4,200 tanks and over 3,100 pieces of heavy artillery. When Iraqi ground forces are softened, beaten down enough, only then will the Allied ground forces uncoil their venom, slowly squeezing the Iraqis into surrender.
I think it's going to be very violent. I think we're going to go in with heavy armor and try to break these units up.
A likely scenario, an amphibious assault from the Persian Gulf, and at the same time, British and Marine forces charge along the coast. And finally, from the west, Saudi and U.S. forces, heavy armored tank divisions, slash through the border, punching further holes in the Iraqi defense. One variation, 2 tank divisions splitting off and hooking into the west of Kuwait, cutting off north and south Iraqi troop movements. Or there's even the possibility of ground forces invading Iraq proper and dividing Iraqi forces in order to conquer. Mike Hegedus, Channel 5, Eyewitness News.
If a ground war begins, the grim reality of the situation is it will no doubt be bloody, as ground wars have always been. If you have a loved one in the Mideast and you're concerned about them, the Pentagon has set up hotlines to provide information on individual members of the armed services. They are the general information numbers you see here. They're toll-free and they're open 24 hours a day. For the best results, you should be ready to provide the correct spelling of the last name, plus other details like social security number, rank, and military unit. Here are the numbers set aside for family members only. If you're not a family member, please don't use them. We should also point out that it's Defense Department policy to notify families in person of any casualties. Now, more on that Scud missile attack at Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. CBS reporter Jay Levine was there when that attack took place. He joins us now by phone from Dhahran. Jay, did you have advance warning of incoming missiles?
Dave, we
had one air raid warning earlier in the evening, about an hour before that happened. In other words, it was just after the Iraqi attack on Israel. Everybody was watching for information there. The air base here had gone to a heightened state of alert when the air raid siren started to sound. Everyone was herded down into the shelters, put on their masks, but after about 45 minutes were allowed to come back upstairs. It was then that we heard a bang outside, sounded like a small explosion, saw a flash of light, and then it was back into the shelters. This time everybody put on the gas masks and their chemical suits. What it turned out to be was a single Iraqi Scud missile fired from Iraq. It was intercepted several hundred yards from here by a U.S. Patriot, and that was the explosion that we heard and the light flash that we saw. So it was very little warning. In fact, there was no warning. That bang and the flash came while everybody was still upstairs and out of the shelter.
So that happened right over your head?
Virtually over our heads. After all, we're right in the middle of a huge concentration of U.S. forces here, and this is a natural target. There are many people who thought that a likely scenario would be simultaneous attacks on both Israel and U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia, perhaps even before the U.S. struck. The fact that it came afterward was not really that big a surprise to people.
Jay, did you know that the base had anti-missile capabilities, had those Patriots there?
Kate, the question I think was, did Israel have the Patriot missiles? Is that what you're asking?
No, I was asking if you knew that the base in Dhahran had anti-missile capabilities.
That's what I thought you did. Yes, we knew that. The Saudis have allowed the Americans to put in the Patriot missiles. Israel, on the other hand, did not have those Patriots. And the Patriot missile really had never been tested in battle before. It was semi-experimental, but here it worked like a charm.
Do you know if this is the first Patriot used in actual combat?
Dave, I can't cite the chapter and verse of military history, but the very fact that people were talking after it happened that this was a big success for the new technology would lead me to believe that it's not unprecedented. It certainly wasn't something that had been done.
Jay, we've heard that there's been an increase in ground troop movements now. Can you tell us anything about that from your perspective?
Yes, Kate, we've been seeing that for about the last 12 hours here in the streets in and around this eastern Saudi city, and also up toward the Kuwaiti border, which is about 70 miles north of where we are. The fact is there's been a tremendous movement, a constant stream of U.S. forces, tanks, vehicles heading up toward the Kuwaiti border. But one thing I want to caution you on is just because there's been movement up toward the border does not mean that they're going to cross the border, that they're ready to move into that ground phase. As you were talking about before, a ground phase which is potentially a much more deadly phase than the air phase of the operation. We don't know exactly when that is going to start. We do know that there are units in camp up. We do know that there are units in camp up near the border that are taking artillery fire from Iraqi forces in either Iraq or Kuwait. And tonight we've gotten reports of slight injuries to 2 Marines and 1 naval corpsman as a result of that artillery fire.
All right, thank you, Jay, for that report. Jay Levine, CBS News, Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Last week, in anticipation of a Mideast war, Bay Area blood banks made urgent pleas for donations. Apparently, those appeals have been answered. These people were giving blood today at Irwin Memorial in San Francisco. There are 5 other Irwin facilities in Northern California. Because of the recent surge in donations, the Irwin blood centers today were able to fill a request from the Pentagon.
We did have enough blood so that when this morning we got a call to send 100 units to the Middle East, we were able to say yes. The blood was sent out. It went to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, and that's where the military takes it over and brings it to the Middle East.
Dr. Perkins stresses that even though there is no blood shortage at the present time, donations are still critically needed as long as the war continues in the Persian Gulf.
While Americans have run through just about every emotion in the last 2 days, what about the feelings of exiled Kuwaitis? Manuel Ramos spent some time today with Omar and Mona Al-Matar, a Kuwaiti couple with 2 young daughters still in Kuwait.
The Al-Matars have been waiting for this for the past 6 months. They were on vacation in America when Kuwait was invaded. They couldn't go back, not even to rescue their 2 daughters.
I can't say I feel happy or glad because it's war. And war means a lot of people going to die and a lot of casualty, which is nothing to be happy about.
They were watching television yesterday when they heard the news of the war. They've been in exile in Daly City since the invasion. So Omar admits he wasn't upset by the bombing of Baghdad and the possible downfall of Hussein.
For someone who's done this much to my country, dismantled the whole country and destroyed everything in it, I think this is just justice. This is a chance to get him in line, put him in line, and tell him that he cannot get away with this.
They now hope the war will be over quickly, and the thought of battles in Kuwait makes them shudder.
That's our people back home. They're just civilians. They've never had a war before, and they don't have any experience with wars. So yes, that really scares us.
The Almatars have been working with other Kuwaitis in the area to free their country, and they say they now see freedom near, and they now see the enemy of their country finally being punished.
We hear about the killing, the torturing, raping, and everything. So it's not just my family, all Kuwaitis back there. And I know they're feeling good now because they wait for a long time for somebody or someone do something about it. And they feel that, you know, the whole world is rescuing them now.
Their daughters, 6 and 7 years old, are with their grandparents. They heard months ago that they were well, but nothing since. Now they pray that they will soon be together again. In Delhi City, Emmanuel Ramos, Channel 5, Eyewitness News.
The Almatar children had been staying with their grandparents. Months ago, the Almatars heard that their daughters were all right, but the parents have not received any word since then. Well, to many people's surprise, Wall Street responded kindly to the news of war in the Middle East. In fact, the Dow jumped over 114 points for its second highest gain ever to close at 2623.51. Oil also made a record jump downward. It tumbled $10.70 to close at $21.44. Gold also fell a considerable amount to $374.40, over $30 less than yesterday's close. The experts say the good news isn't really much of a surprise, since the certainty of war is easier to bank on than the uncertainty that we've been dealing with for the last 5 months.
Now a recap of the day's events in the Desert War. Iraq fired Scud ballistic missiles into Israel and Saudi Arabia. 10 people were slightly injured in Israel. 8 missiles landed there, but they were not, as feared, carrying chemical warheads. Only 1 missile was aimed at Saudi Arabia. That was thought to be a message from Saddam Hussein. It was intercepted by an American anti-missile Patriot missile. So far, no countermove by the Israelis. However, we are told that the council is meeting right now discussing the possibility of retaliation. The Allied air offensive has intensified, with more than 1,000 missions counted over the last 24 hours. American B-52s have been carpet bombing troop emplacements in Iraq and in occupied Kuwait. There are reports that American tanks and ground units are moving to the border area, but those units are under a strict news blackout. Saddam Hussein says he will crush any invasion, but Eyewitness News reports from his capital say the defense ministry is a pile of rubble, and hospitals in occupied Kuwait are overwhelmed with Iraqi casualties. The only known American death is a Navy pilot from Jacksonville, Florida. He was shot down in the early hours of the bombing, and we have had a report that a second plane has gone down. We'll have more for that as the night moves on.
We will continue monitoring the events in the Persian Gulf, and we'll be covering the reaction here in the Bay Area with our newscast tomorrow.
From all of us, good night and good luck from Eyewitness News as we return to CBS News in New York.
I'm tired of seeing this protest that, that everybody's putting them down. They're over there trying to do a job and make things better for us here in this country.
It's a good feeling to know that we're kicking their ass.
If you're not dispersed, you'll be subject to arrest. We will begin making arrests immediately. Arrests will be starting immediately.
This isn't what I pay my taxes, city taxes for either. It's to hurt peaceful demonstrators.
You're in my ear.
We picked out one country to protect. There are tons of countries.
But you cannot protect one country. Protect one country. No, you listen to what I'm saying.
You
talk too much. What's left? You are not listening.
He hasn't even
you say?